Welcome to today's stream, everyone. Following up to yesterday's, we ran into a couple of issues using Midjourney yesterday, so we pivoted and used Blue Willow instead to generate some AI images that we then took into Perspective Plotter and made some 3D scenes using Perspective Plotter. So, figured out what was wrong with me using Midjourney yesterday. And we're going to be using that today to showcase a different process that yields a similar result, but can be more useful than not depending on the situation or depending on the type of geometry you're working with. But basically, with yesterday's technique and today's technique, there's two different approaches to generating these 3D environments, 3D models from 2D images via AI. More to come with the new tech that's rising up and everything that's going on with the AI world and all the advances that NVIDIA's making and Facebook's making, all these other companies jumping in on this. So pretty soon we'll have technology, excuse me, software that not only generates images but generates 3D models from images. In fact, we already kind of have this. But I think these approaches still will become relevant and be relevant in order to be able to apply certain conditions to 3D scenes. So again, this technology is evolving really, really fast, but as far as what's available today, I think these tools are still really relevant and will remain relevant techniques moving on in the future. It also sort of prepares you to kind of start understanding what the relationship is between 2D AI images and generating these models. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So this is a GitHub that I tried to show into yesterday's stream, and I was having some issues connecting to it. I think the reason why I was restricted yesterday is actually because they introduced new information for the new version of Midjourney. So if we take a look here, again, thanks and shout out to Will Wolfkin for this layout or for this amazing resource. So you can basically scroll through here and look through a whole library of results that you can get from Midjourney styles and keyword references. So you can come down here and go through different styles or different artists, color palettes, materials. There's different sections that you can hit. So I hit digital, and I did that just in case I come up with another issue on the website as I'm working through this. But I hit on digital, and what digital is, it brings you to this section here, and we can see you have the different versions of Midjourney, and I clicked here for version 5 alpha. If we scroll down, we have different categories, right? So we have art programs and applications, image formats and types, interpolation, websites, right? What does this all mean? Well, essentially, these are all just categories of words that you can use in your prompts and what you could expect those words to yield in your results for Midjourney. So for example, if I go over the art programs and applications, we see we have program, app, application, Microsoft Paint. MS Paint apparently yields something different than Microsoft Paint, so that's nice to know. Adobe Lightroom, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, so different software results that you could get. There was one I was checking out just now. I don't know if it's here for VFX. And these are different studios. Currently only have the Pixomundo. But I had seen here one for render engines. 8-bit. Perhaps that was under version 4. I have that for version 5 yet. So if I go to version 4, we have rendering engines right up here at the top. So if we just put rendering engine, pretty generic, unpredictable. What does he get as a result? We put Octane, Cinema 4D, C4D. C4D looks to be a bit more abstract and basic than Cinema 4D tends to be. Unreal Engine, Unity Engine, Houdini Render, Redshift. Redshift has become quite a big popular one to be used here, I think, for all the sci-fi type of effects that it gets. I've mentioned before, Blender tends to give you pretty cartoony results. I don't know if I call it cartoony, but yeah, it's kind of like this really photoreal Pixar type style. You've got Cycles, which is part of Blender, Optics, which is included in Blender, but also others. Curious how V-Ray doesn't look so much like ArcViz, which is generally what V-Ray is mainly used for, but has a bit more creativity to it here. Anywho, I find this incredibly useful to start directing what sort of style you want for your prompts. There's also resources here for how to format your prompts, but with that, I'm going to just drive. So, Arnold is a rendering engine, but I suppose when you do Arnold render, you're actually getting an Arnold Schwarzenegger render. So we'll jump into Discord here, and once you have a subscription for Midjourney, you start being able to access the Midjourney bot directly here. So you basically just start DMing with the bot here. So I can do a command here for imagine, and for the prompts, what we want to do is we want to start out with what our subject is, what it is that we want the AI to focus on, right? So for starters, we want to do, in this case, for what we're going to be showcasing today, is going to be an interior scene. So I've found that this method of turning 2D images into 3D images doesn't work so well with environments. It works best with objects and can work well for interior, as long as your interior doesn't have like loose objects around. Otherwise, it can get a little dicey. So we'll test something out. We'll do an interior of a, why don't we do architecture pavilion? Interior of an architecture, oh, let's do parametric. Interior of a parametric architecture pavilion. So we can just do that. That's what our subject is. Now we want to add little things that can enhance or direct a little bit what it is that we want for that subject. So we can add things like, we can do modular design, cavern, feel. The guidelines, it does say like, you know, be grammatically correct in what you're saying, so we can add some phrases. So we can put something like space for meditation and contemplation. So from there, we want to move on to other details that can sort of start informing or supporting the environment of that main subject. So we are talking about a space, so we can just add some things like perhaps lighting, right? So we could say ambient lighting. We can also put skylight perforating through ceiling, right? Something like that. Okay. Next, we want to start getting into style or stylizing this, right? Or some words that can inform like what sort of style or vibe we're going for. So in this case, we already talked a little bit about lighting, which could inform some style, but this is more specific to what we were just discussing, such as the render engine that we're choosing to use. So we could put, if we go back to our reference sheet, since I had it over here, and pick a certain style that I want. SketchUp is interesting. That's really cool. Very architectural. But OpenGL is pretty photoreal. Let's go ahead and do, oh, this is really interesting. Infinity render. Go ahead and put that in there. Infinity render, and we'll cross that with possibly this one here, OpenGL. So let's go back over to Midjourney, put in Infinity render, OpenGL. Yeah. And then lastly, we can enter some commands on what we want for aspect ratio, like if you wanted to specifically do a 16:9 or a square image or something like that. But I'm going to just leave it open with that. So that's generally the prompt style I want to go for. Yesterday I did show how using ChatGPT to generate prompts can also be effective. There was one that I ended up using in Blue Willow as well. So I ended up comparing how those prompts from ChatGPT perform from Blue Willow versus Midjourney. Although it's not exactly fair because I did train that ChatGPT instance to follow the Midjourney prompt guide, not the Blue Willow prompt guide. So that would be an interesting video or session to do in the future. So we see what we get here. Really basic. I don't want to say basic. I mean, fairly complex, but it's a pretty straightforward image. One issue I am picking up here with doing a depth map is having these perforations, so many perforations that just bleed through into emptiness, right? We would prefer to have sort of solid objects as much as possible for this method. So perhaps we can add to our prompt a mesh over the entire thing. So I'll copy this here. I'll re-input our prompt. Imagine. And rather than having, you know, all these different openings in it, I'm imagining I'm getting that because of the skylight perforating through ceiling. We'll switch that part of the prompt into something like cloth mesh, translucent cloth mesh. Wrapped around pavilion. Let's try that out. I'm also going to ask for some variations on one of these. So I'll take the one that's closed, more closed, or has the most amount of ambient lighting, a combination of the two. Maybe I'll ask for variations on both 1 and 2. Let's just get those in the works. We'll wait here for another. So that's good. We can already see this new prompt is yielding some less sky elements, or less, you know, see-through elements. Take a look here what we got. It's a lot more dreamlike with that translucent cloth effect, but not bad. Having a person in there can be problematic. However, it can always be resolved with another technique. I'm really interested in number 1 and number 4 for this one. I think we'll pick out, go ahead and upscale number 4 and maybe ask for some variation on 1. We'll go ahead and do that. So upscale 4 variations on 1. So we just click U4 there and V1. And let's see, we got some variations on that other one. So pretty interesting as far as like conceptualizing the space, but not usable for the technique that we're going to be doing today. Perhaps number 4 could be, only because kind of have this bit of dark regions happening on the sides, and then the perforations happen more towards the center where it's further away from camera. But gonna have to skip that one. I just wanted to kind of see if we could arrive at something, but these variations are just sort of too close to each other. I'll have to do a follow-up video on how deep you can get into Midjourney as far as creating iterations and things like that. But yeah, this is going to work a lot better for the intents and purposes that we have for this method today. Hard choice here. I want to upscale, I don't know about all of them, but maybe I'll just upscale the simpler panels. Because this level of complexity, don't know how that might work out. Although the silhouette here might also throw off method, and all this will, maybe, explain more detail once we get into what the depth map plays into. Let's take a look at. Let's end up upscaling. I think let's go for 3. Upscale 3. And here we have the upscaled version for this one, which is honestly pretty fantastic. This might work really, really well for this. So we'll go ahead and open that in our browser. I need IT person to help me with my Chrome. I don't know what's going on with Chrome, but I can't download anything. It's been a while now. I've reinstalled it. I've done all kinds of things, but here I am doing some AI voodoo stuff, and I'm not able to resolve my browser. Okay, so got that image. We're waiting on an upscaled version of that last one. Upscale. Got those two to mess with for now. Give that a second. If, for anyone watching, if you'd like to comment on which one I should create variations from in here. I mean, I already did the first one and the fourth one. So if you pick those as well, I can create some more variations off of those. We can go down that pipeline. But while we wait for this last image, I'll just go ahead and give a couple moments. If you have anyone in the comments or in the chat wants to drop in a suggestion for which one to upscale. Okay. I want to leave this up, but I also want to check on my image. We got our image. No contribution there from the chat, but that's all right. We're gonna work with these two. We'll go there from open in the browser and on browser again. Edge, so we can save this image. All right. Cool. So now that we have images, I have some other images I had created just in testing this process. So we can close out of here. We can, I mean, I won't close out here, but we won't need Midjourney for now. What we're going to use is a couple of other websites. So we have these linked in the description below. The websites to be used are, the thing is, there's two that can be used. And the thing is, I do like this one better. So a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people use this one on Hugging Face, the Midas method, in order to create depth maps from images. However, I don't like the results of this method as much as this website that I found. However, this website flags some of my Midjourney images as being inappropriate, which was totally weird. So that was kind of a bummer. But we'll use these links here. I'm just gonna have to use my alternate browser. There we go. So all we do is scroll down here where we drop an image. So we'll drop in our first image, which was this one. Drop that in, give that a moment or two. Check mark. Explicit content detected. Yeah, I'm wondering if it's, I don't know why it does that. I'm wondering if it's the resolution of the image causing this problem. I haven't had it happen with the Blue Willow images that I use to test, but for some reason the Midjourney images get flagged. There's also a bunch of ads on this website, which I'm not appreciating, but I do like the results that this website gives, more so than the other one, the Midas one. Let's see if we could do this one. Not sure if it's a resolution issue. Image processed. So I was able to do these four and generate a depth map for all of those. The resolution on that one that I just fed in was 1024. So let's try taking down the resolution just for the sake of testing out this depth map. So we can do that just by doing a resize image right here on a PC. So, oh, it's 1024 by 1020. That's strange. Let's do 50%. Save it a separate image. Just to test and see if that's the issue. That's so weird. That is just flagging the image for no reason. Gotta fix your image detector there. So let's try, we'll hit restart, start over, scroll down, plug in that one. Let's see if the lower resolution image works. Explicit content detected, cannot continue. So that's a bummer. The other alternate we have is the Midas method. So again, this works generally with pretty much any image. However, I don't like the results that this method provides as much as this one. The alternate to these would be using a depth model that Hugging Face has to use in Stable Diffusion directly. However, that would involve explaining the entire Stable Diffusion software, which again, leave for another session. For now, we'll drop in this image here and hit submit, and it's fairly quick. Just give it a second, and there we go. We end up with depth for that scene. So things that are lighter are closer to camera, and things that are darker are further from camera. Download this image, and we'll save it into our folder. And it's something similar to the other one. Okay, so we have our depth map for that one, and we'll clear that out. We'll create one for the other one as well. So hit that, give that a second. Okay, not bad. We'll bring that through, save that into the same folder. Let's see. Okay, so with our AI images from Midjourney and with our depth map, we're now ready to go into Blender. So within Blender, we're going to delete everything. We're going to make sure that first in your preferences you have your image, import images as planes enabled. This is an add-on that comes in with Blender, so you just have to enable it in order to start using it. So we make sure we have that checked. We do Shift A, image, images as planes, and then we can refer to our folder here in order to bring in those images that we created. So modified, and we'll skip the depth. So we could try this one first, and you look at it in material preview. Boom, right there it is. So it's already set on there. Now, how do we start distorting this by using a depth map? Well, there is another plugin to do that, but I'm going to show you the old school way to do it in Blender. Not old school way, but there's a plugin that you basically just select the two images and it knows what to do with the two. But I'm actually going to bring in here and add a modifier for subdivision of the surface. We're going to do simple. We're going to bring this up to 6 and hit apply right here, or Control A. So that will allow to have, a whole grid, many little faces here, which helps for the next modifier we're going to use, which is displace. And with the displace modifier, we want to create a new texture here to use. Then we go down here to the texture properties, and this is where we plug in our depth map. So we go ahead and hit open, we plug back in our directory here, and now I need to look at my depth maps to see which one I want to use. So this is the one that relates to this image, so I'll go ahead and bring that one in, and there we go. We start to see it starts to push and pull the parts of the image, using that depth map, and as a depth map is generated from the image, it should match together, right? If you don't do anything to the surface, they should be pretty much in line, right? If you just have a 1-to-1 scale. So with that, if we go over to back to our modifiers for the displacement, we can change the strength and change how much it displaces. You can see there it's pulling down quite a bit. I do notice that it has a little bit of an issue with the ground plane at times, but either way, I think this is a good way to just start setting up these more organic looking shapes, right? To be able to have these sort of like mesh and photo match really quickly with relatively little effort. The method I showed yesterday works better with rectilinear things or like environment architectural stuff, but if you're having something that's more sculpted, it would take a while to model all this out, and if it is for a scene or for a background to be used, then this is the, I think, quicker way to get something mocked up, right? So how do we use this? Well, we can move this back to 0, 0, 0. We can rotate it. I mean, however you want to set up your scene. In my case, I'll just rotate this 90, and I'll bring in a camera into the scene. Take away all rotations from the camera here in the properties, so that I can rotate it 90 in the x-axis in this case. So my camera is basically pointing right at this. And then move it on the y-axis. I could also have the camera be the same aspect ratio as my original image, so it can sort of fit there. Okay, it's still looking a little rough, obviously, so we want to add another subdivision to this. So we'll go to the Modifiers tab, go into Subdivision of the Surface. There we go. And for this one, we'll use Catmull Clark. We can take that up to 3. Now it's really, really smooth. And we can add the ground plane, adding in a mesh, bringing that down so it matches the ground plane of the scene, like right here. Go back to our view, it's getting cut off. If we select this plane, we do the same thing we did to the other surface. So we do subdivision, simple, bring it up to like 5, then Control A to apply. You get all these grid cells right here. Apply the same material we're using on that top one. Hit Tab A to select everything. U, and then project from view. This is where we start by combining the two methods together. This is a little bit tricky because I do need to, might have to like tweak a little bit how that gets applied, or just use different, rotating it kind of weird here. Yeah, misclicked. So we can create two faces here so we can keep a view on our camera. And in the 3D space, we'll actually mess with this material here. We can mess with this plane here so it actually matches with the geometry rather than camera view. Down. So that right there matches with the ground plane pretty well. So we can have a combination of some ground plane here for that subject, and then the rest of this should fill in with the rest of the ground plane. Something I could have covered yesterday, which I'll cover now. I mean, it's really simple. If we bring back that material and we, again, project from view, that seems to be matching pretty well right now. Feel like off here. Maybe not. I mean, should be intersecting with the mesh. I might need to mess with my camera settings. So if we go to the camera, go over to camera settings, and we change the clip start, we turn this down. Make sure we're getting everything in. And if we go to the UV editor, or UV editing here, we see how this plane is being basically projected over the image, right? And how we need to tweak this thing so that it has the proper perspective. So I can hit S, scale in one axis. There we go. Make sure that we have it positioned where we intended. So that's sort of what we wanted. Right here, if we check the material preview, that's what we wanted out of our ground plane. What we might have to do is actually move our camera back a little. Scale our camera down. Let's see. If I go to my shading editor, you can check out what's going on here. I see. So there is an alpha being plugged in. I'm gonna take that out. Don't have an alpha. And now there should be no transparency, and we should how these affect. This is because of our material preview. I remember now. So we go to our camera view, and if we want to see how these two planes are actually intersecting, we have to start looking at it in rendered mode. So we'll go over here to our render view, and we'll switch over to cycles, set that to GPU. Now set this to rendered, and we have no lights. So what we want to do is we want to bring back, some of the light that is in this image, right? Because right now there's no lights in the scene. If I turn it completely dark, it's going to be completely dark. So we'll shift this over to a shader editor. In order to bring in the lights that we have in that scene, we have here our image in the shader editor, and we'll hit Shift A to a color ramp. Plug in, actually it's not a color ramp. What we want is a brightness contrast. We bring in this color channel into the brightness contrast. We can preview what's going on with Control-Shift-Click. So now this is emitting, or now we're just straight up seeing what that image looks like. So there is no actual lighting effect on it. So what we want is to increase the contrast and lower the brightness. So we can really crunch in those areas, have some light. So for where the light is originating from, bring down the brightness further. And all this color stuff, it is sort of reflecting light, so it'll be a softer effect. But what we want is to desaturate this a little bit. We'll bring in a hue saturation, plug that in, desaturate that some. It'll have a little hint of color, a little bit, and then that's what we plug into our emission here for the shader. Do Control-Shift-Click on material now. We can see this is now the combination of the light source and the original image. So if I were to unplug the emission, it turns black again. If I plug in that into emission, we start to get some light. We can play with the strength of the emission here. We see they're starting to bring back details. You can really tune that up. And okay. I would even suggest after the brightness contrast, we could do a blur. Subsurface scattering. No, how do we do? We go in for, I think I'm thinking of the compositor. But maybe just lowering the contrast. I think we might have gone too hard with the contrast. Yep, there we go. So here's the original image. Here's our lighting, right? And here's our final result of the combination. So there's a little bit of finessing here to do. So continue to make changes with the color section. So we have brightness, contrast, gamma, hue saturation value, invert, light fall off, mixed color, all this jazz. So if we were to do RGB curves, you can kind of tweak the intense points of the emission and low points, kind of soften out the image. Also turn down the image strength. Okay. We'll add in a world here. So for the background, we'll just introduce some light. We'll make this lighter and then start bringing up the strength. Okay. So now we have some nice ambient light, and we have actual light coming through from this environment. So similar to the original result, why do we want to do it in 3D? Well, now having it in 3D means we can throw something else in here, right? So say we wanted to, yeah, I should save. Model. Okay. So yeah, we can now use that image as an actual 3D scene. So we have an issue here with obviously the camera cropping in too much, so we can move it, add closer and over so that we don't have any negative space. And if I wanted to bring in, you know, let's say I brought in some rocks, right? Or I brought in some plants or whatnot. We can use, for example, Blender Kit to do so. We can go over here to Blender Kit, Models, Rocks. Let's just look up some rocks. Yeah, these look great. They're all photoreal. True, that's huge, but fine. Either the rock is huge or my space is too tiny. I'm gonna bet on my space being tiny. So I'm actually gonna select both of these and the camera and just scale the whole scene up so that my units probably make more sense now. If I look through the camera, nothing's changed. You scale the camera up with your geometries, you know, everything will still, relative to the camera, nothing will change. But now this rock is more accurate to its size. I can move it down and away. There we go. I'd like to place it just on top of the surface. So we wireframe here or shaded. And maybe on its flat side. I'm not gonna. I'm just trying to get that right. There we go. Go back to rendered mode. So the cool thing here is, right, if I move this over, right, so if I put it in the light, you know, we're not getting that light streak, right? That's because the light is actually just on the surface here, right, and coming from outside. So what we want to do is start introducing more and more elements. So if we start populating the scene with 3D objects, we also want to start adding some elements that will relate the image of the environment to the new subjects we're introducing in. So if I add in an area light and move that back, X, sort of like have it follow the same, there we go. Change in the light properties, we can change the spread of the light because it is very harsh light, so we get exactly that shape of the light. We can turn up the power, and we can size of light in the shape, scaling it. So yeah, it might take a little bit to get that to match. But the cool thing about this too is we can, through more settings, more tweaking, you could actually take this right here, go to its object properties, and for shading or visibility, we can actually turn off glossy and use one in the camera. Show in renders, show in viewports, selectable. There is a setting to turn it off so it doesn't actually affect the ground plane. It doesn't actually affect the image. I'll just have to follow up on that, how that gets done, because off the top of my head, I don't quite remember how to do that. We do see here we're able to light this rock. If we just tweak the color of the light, we could even use the eyedropper to select this floor right here, like the color of the floor. So now, you know, the color and the lighting and the direction of the shadow of the rock matches more closely to the scene. So we can start to use this as a 3D scene for different things. The little trick I did in the post that I made today to announce the stream, I added in a sphere. And I made it a new material, I made it completely metallic and no roughness at all. Added a bunch of subdivision modifier to it, Catmull Clark, got a bunch of faces to it. I think I rendered at 5. And so you actually get the reflections of the space on the chrome ball. So it sort of seems like, where you're giving the illusion that this is actually 3D space. right next to the walls over here. Again, like the height map might not be so perfect or as accurate to the geometry as it should be, but from camera view, you know, you wouldn't tell. But if we copy this over, right, we're getting accurate reflections, fairly accurate on these spheres from what the environment is. If you wanted to apply that effect and further tweak this geometry, we could always apply that by going over here and hitting, you could either apply a shape key or save a shape key. I'll just go ahead and hit apply. If I hit tab now, I have all these different faces, and I could even take this into sculpting, right? And start to mess with the shape and sculpting a bit more. So if I wanted to punch this in, here we go, more intensity. If I wanted to mess with the shape here with the sculpting, I mean, that's not what I want. Control, push here, we can push that in. You could use the, where is it, the crease tool here to make these edges a bit sharper on the geometry. And you can see the image is actually distorting with the mesh at this point. So they're one and the same. If we look at that in 3D now, if I zoom in, I do here, anti-zoom in. If I go to my layout to show you, right, these areas that I've sculpted and I've pinched here are now more accurate to what the image actually has going on there. So again, it's all sort of visual trickery from the camera view, but that's all you're doing for conceptual designs, really, is visual tricks. So this is a quick mock-up for one scene. We're gonna quickly do the other image. And as I quickly run through, I'm going to kind of just speed through doing a new file here with the other image. So at this time, if you want to throw in any questions in the chat or any comments, anything at all, I'll be paying close attention. We're going to use this other image real quick. I already went through the process in the stream. You can always go back if you want a more detailed version, but I'm just going to quickly show off doing it with the other one. So we'll do a image, images as planes. Go over to our depth model folder. Other image we created was this one, where images as planes. Have our material there. We'll go ahead and go to the modifier, do subdivide, simple, get up to 5, hit apply. Then we'll do place. Place, we do a new texture, go over down here to the texture properties, open, back to our folder, select our depth model, which is this. Okay, starts to tweak with it. We don't have enough faces yet, so I'm gonna actually do, if I hit tab, you see we have that many faces, I'm actually going to do another subdivision, but move it before the displacement, so it has more faces to read from. And this is why I was mentioning I didn't like that one resource. I like the other one better. It was higher quality depth maps, because it's smoother. Once we start adding this, we see like all these different layers. You can fix that with another subdivision at the end that does Catmull Clark, or even I think getting rid of this one beforehand kind of makes it like that. So we'll increase the strength of the displacement. Start to see these, you know, distortions here. It starts to look a little bit weird in this camera view. Rotate on the x-axis, 90. Bring in a camera. Go away all rotations from the camera. RX 90. The back. Look through. Make our aspect ratio match. 1080, 1080. And then move in close. Go. Cool. And save that now. Stream model 2. And if I go to rendered view to see this properly, and have an issue here because there's no light, right? So we want to take this, open our shader editor, and do our manipulation here. Take out the alpha, and we'll plug this into emission. arguably that looks better than what I did in the other file without any edits. So it might depend on your image, but without any edits in here, arguably this is actually looking much better. If I throw in a sphere here, and we have this going, use sphere. Whoa, big. Where's the sphere at? Not too close to camera. Put that into the scene. Larger. Getting that soft lighting. So getting real soft backlighting. So let's say I wanted to light the front of this similar to the back. The ways I can go about that, we did earlier is we hit a color here for the world, and I just kind of swatched a color from right there. So it's getting sort of flatly lit, same as the outside, and I can tweak the intensity of this. Way too much. Let's see, if I try something warmer. I mean, sure. We can do something like that. We can also just play with grayscale and keep it as such. What you can also do is go to color and do an environment texture, and then we just select that image that we're using. So it's gonna look a little weird. If we look around, it's like we're inside the space, and it's all distorted all around. But that does allow us to use, you know, that same image, the same conditions as the image, to front light this. We can also always introduce our own lights, you know, play with it as well. We go over here in our shader editor, we switch to world. We have right here our image that's being applied to the whole environment. We can do Control T, and Control T will work if you go to preferences and have the Node Wrangler add-on. Node Wrangler just has a bunch of little shortcuts and tweaks that you can use in the shader editor and such. So one of those shortcuts is if you select an image texture and hit Control T, you introduce a mapping setup. So we're using the, you actually want to use the objects UV, not the generated. And we can rotate on the Z-axis. So we can move this world around, and we can see how that affects the lighting on the sphere here. I'm going to turn on my denoiser just so I look more professional, or it looks like I have a better computer than I actually do. Because it'll just denoise real quick. Okay, so that's a couple of lighting techniques, and we quickly went, you know, through the whole process that I used in the previous. So with that, I mean, let's give this guy his very own weird metal sphere. There. So obviously at one point you clip through the image, right? And if you need to distort the environment more, you can always do that in the modifiers. So, Diego Sierra, are you able to create the same scenes using Rhino? Yes, actually. Funny to get a Rhino question. I've moved away from Rhino quite a bit, but you know, I usually cut off after an hour, and we're just shy of that. So I can show you how to do this in Rhino actually, because there is a command in Rhino to do this. So if you're just tuning in, I created the height map from the image using this Midas method on Hugging Face. Links are all in the description. And there's also this photo of the depth tool. But I'll show quickly how to use this in Rhino. Jimothy would be interested to see this with grease pencil sort of created a layered panel. Yes, absolutely. And grease pencil is something I have not tapped into at all. I'm coming from a ArcViz background, architectural visualization, and I do kind of do line drawings and such, although I haven't been doing that so much in Blender. Although I did find this new technique. We'll do these two things, because they're both real quick. So if we do, before we move on into Rhino and address Diego's comment, we add in a grease pencil, we add in a stroke. I did learn that there's this modifier for the grease pencil called line art. and we can have it target a collection. So if we have it target the only collection I have here, and then we set it to colors, yes, so, and then we set the lines to black. Now we have a black outline all around that sphere. We can tune the line thickness here. So the sphere has a line, but this face doesn't. And we can tweak that by selecting the grease pencil again through all these properties that you have here for line art. So it's so much. You could do edge type, so you can select the type of crease. So if we increase the crease level here, I'm going to crash my Blender because I think I subdivided this mesh a whole lot. We can increase the crease level, we can do material borders, yeah, I mean geometry processing, overlapping edges. Yeah, again, not that familiar with the grease pencil tool. I just barely started scratching the surface of it, but I do know there is this modifier, and depending on how you set up your geometry here, whoa. I suppose just like the other one, if I were to apply my displacement modifier and then tab into it, I could select some of these edges with Alt-click, and with N, increase the crease. There we go. That's adding in a line, although it doesn't line up at all to the image. So yeah, that would require a bit more work. You can draw with the grease pencil right on top of the geometry. That is something I have to do a lot of practice myself with. I'd love to revisit that in the future once I do get some practice with it. But I've just started learning, getting into doing this line work within Blender. To do this process for Rhino, as I was explaining, you use the same images. There's a command here called height field. Height field. Haven't done this in a while, so hopefully I don't run into trouble. We select that folder, and we want to use the depth map created by one of those tools in the description below, either this one. For those just joining, I do like this one better, the results that it yields, this Image Amiga one, but it flags all my Midjourney images. I don't know why. It's only the images I make in Midjourney, the really high res ones, it just won't process. So I end up using the Midas one, which isn't as high detail of a depth map, but with subdivisions and a little visual trickery, you can get around that. Or upscaling the depth map, I guess you can do that too. So in Rhino, we go into the depth map. So if we were to do that same one we were just working on, it's this one. So we open that, we draw out our footprint where we want that to go. And then this number of samples is going to be really critical. So this is basically like samples here translates to the subdivisions here, right? So 20 by 20 would mean you have 20 by 20 squares over in Rhino. So sure, or we could do 50 by 50. Don't crash here. Should probably turn off render view in Blender if I'm going to do this once. It's funny when you take it into solid view and it's just a blob. If you turn on the material, it kind of photos as textures just does. It's cheating, but it's great cheating. I love it. So then we have a height here. So how much height we want to introduce, or how much distortion do we want to introduce here? I have no sense of scale right now for what I'm doing in Rhino, so I'm just gonna hit a number, maybe 20, and then stretch as I need to. So set the image's texture, sure, guiding me now, but I will replace it with the actual image. And then create object by mesh with vertices, surface, or interpolating. It's really what's going to be more efficient, and that depends a lot more on your computer and your specs. But I do think mesh is going to work better for me, and with this height field command, I just hit OK. And we see there's very little distortion with the amount that I chose. If I go over here to rendered view, you can see the depth map here. I'm starting to think depth map isn't applied properly in Blender. So that would be good for a follow-up stream to visit that plugin that bring us in a depth map with the image. But here I can just scale in the z-axis, stretch it, and make it more pronounced. You know, obviously we end up getting a lot of jagged edges because of the resolution that we chose in the beginning. All that could be fixed with, we go to mesh tools. Really making me work for it here asking a Rhino question. It's been so long, but there is a way to smoothen or subdivide meshes in Rhino. I'm not getting too concerned with it, but I'll just go to materials here. We have custom material, yes, but I want to change the image. So click here, bring up this panel, hit the three dots to browse for the file. We select the image that corresponds to that depth map and hit open, okay, and boom, now we have it in Rhino. It's, you know, you still have to, how's this set up? It's looking down, so same thing, just like in Blender, we would rotate 90 so that we can see it from frontal view here. So you'd have to set up a camera. And again, like, I think this type of process, up until when we get our AI generated meshes, you know, really advanced, which NVIDIA announced at their TTC conference that they're working on the Picasso service, which will generate image, videos, and 3D models from prompts. You know, this is what we got. I think between the projection modeling that I was doing yesterday, using perspective plotter, and this technique here with the height fields, this is what we got to have, you know, these images brought into 3D worlds and start being able to conceptualize. And I'm a big believer of tracing models as you phase through the concept or as you progress, right? So depends what the use case is. If I'm just providing a conceptual design, I'll make it look good in renders and I'll make it look good in drawings, and that's it. It doesn't matter what the 3D looks like behind the scenes, because all you care about is your presentation, right? Once you get into schematic, you have to start, depends on, again, what your deliverable is. If you're just doing, you know, visual effects or proposals, conceptual is pretty much where you stay at until you post-process for just visuals. If you're doing things like furniture, spaces, pavilions, architecture, anything that has to actually, products, you know, anything that has to be brought into the real world, you move into schematic phase, where you start relating to actual real world objects. And between conceptual and schematic, what I'll do is I'll just trace, actually. So if this is conceptual, if I were to move from here to schematic, I would actually just start building all this out on top of this mesh here. And what I'm doing there is rationalizing what the AI did, how this was brought into the 3D software, and then ultimately how we could actually translate this into something that makes sense. A lot more rationalizing of the geometry was done in the method I did yesterday. So if you are planning for that sort of thing, then probably the method I used in the video, the stream yesterday, you can check that out, is probably going to serve you better. But yeah, for visuals and conceptuals, and organic shapes, definitely, this is a good method. I will introduce that other plugin that in another session. We're wrapping up here. But yeah, I'll test out that plugin that brings in the depth map and the image together and kind of skips some of the process that I did here of subdividing and adding depth to the image. This is sort of like the manual way of doing it, so that plugin is supposed to make it better, or make it more direct, take away some steps. But now I'm starting to think, you know, seeing how the depth map is being applied on the bottom here versus how it was applied here in the Rhino, where we actually have a ground plane, I'm starting to think that the application of the texture here, and it's not there anymore because I applied it, isn't true to the image. It looks like it is, but yeah, I might be missing something. But you still get the effect. But yeah, that'll be interesting. So, as we wrap up, if there's any other questions that you want to throw in the chat there, as we close out, well, you know, welcome that. Happy to answer anything else. This is all in service of my comic book project, which I'm crunching for now because I've locked in my workflow now for creating my environments. dropping in my subjects, making my renders, inking, and I got the story laid out. So um, for one of these streams, I was planning on showing how I've been using ChatGPT to not only polish, write out, and help me with outlining and scripting the story, but actually creating prompts derived from the story that can then be used in Midjourney to build out this whole world, story and visual all together. So stay tuned for everything coming up. You could follow me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. I post the day of the stream what the stream's going to be about. That's because typically I'm just kind of working through the project, and as I'm doing research, as I'm developing, as I'm producing, I'm relating the streams to my actual process, so that's why it's so in the moment. You can follow me on any one of those channels, link in the profiles. If you want to find out what I'm streaming about, you could also turn on notifications for the channel, and then you'll just know when I'm live. But thanks for dropping in. If that's all, then I thank you all for tuning in, and I hope to see you in the next stream. Cheers. Have a great night. Thanks for dropping by.